Today folks, we're going to look at saws so that we have the tools to cut timber to the right sizes. So I want to introduce you to two styles of saws. Now the saws on the left here, I've had them about 40 years and they are genuine tradie tools, and they can be resharpened with the right skills and the right tools, and they all have wooden handles, as you could probably identify. Now these here, they have plastic handles, as you can see, and they are what we call throwaway tools. Now in today's unfortunate society of throw away rather than fix or restore, these saws are made of cheap materials, and they consist basically of a plastic handle and cheap steel blade, and the teeth at the bottom, they have been heated to red hot and then quickly tempered in oil, which hardens them more than the actual blade. The only problem with that is that they are then harder than the average file that we can use to resharpen them. So we chuck them, and that's what the market wants. Replacement, and there's no longevity in these tools. Now this one here, that's a general purpose saw, and what they've done now, they've made the teeth as virtually a combination, and I'll get into that in a minute, because you get cross-cut saws and you get rip saws. So I'll explain that first. When you're cutting wood, as you know now, it has a grain, and you can identify from the pointy end of the grain which way the tree was growing. And when you cut timber down the length, you need what you call a rip saw. So ripping is down the grain, whereas cross-cutting is obviously across the grain. Now, I don't know if you've seen any pioneer film footage in the forest where you get one man in a pit and one man on top standing on the log. He pulls the saw and the other one pulls it down, he pulls it back up. It's called pit sawing. So the man in the pit, he cops all the sawdust and the man up top, he's got to pull the saw back up, and then the bloke down the bottom pulls it back into the pit. And that's how they ripped a log along the grain before it could be utilised and transported more easily. So the same principle applies to ripping and cross-cutting. Now this saw here, I recently acquired that from a neighbour of mine who's sadly gone into a nursing home, and he says, "Frank, you're a chippy, you can have my rip saw." And I said, wow. I said, ripper. I like that. Anyway, I restored it recently. The handle was all weathered and looked a bit of a mess, and there was a bit of surface rust on the blade. So I love restoring stuff, particularly old tools, because they last a lifetime if you look after them. So the idea of a rip saw is that it has different teeth to a crosscut saw, which is that one. So you may notice, first of all, the size of the teeth. Now this saw here, it has 4 teeth per inch. That's how you classify a saw blade, by having so many teeth per inch. So this one has 4 teeth per inch, this one has 8 teeth per inch, because it doesn't need to do the work that the rip saw does. Now if I were to look at the saw that way, from front end on, I will show you what the teeth look like. So let's blow this whole thing up to the width of the blade, which is this piece here. And then at the bottom we have one tooth, and then across there another tooth. So the teeth are bent either side of the blade. So when you cut timber, the blade doesn't get jammed in the kerf or in the cut. So you don't have to struggle with it, push and pull, and this thing's getting stuck all the time. So you make the cut quite easily because only the blades, or the teeth I should say, do the cutting. So being a rip saw, every blade works like a chisel. So the blade of a chisel is virtually that and that. So that one cuts that way, that one cuts that way. And as you push the saw forward, the chisel action cuts through the material and eventually gets to the end of the cut. So that's what a rip saw is made of, a whole series of little chisels all working together at a distance wider than the blade. So this distance here is called the set. And if a saw is not set, as in the blades being alternately bent, the blade will get stuck and you will be really working hard at getting through the wood. Also, when timber is cut down the grain, it can still have certain tensions in it from the natural growth. So the two halves that you're cutting, they might go outwards or they might go inwards and jam your saw up. So the idea is, as you progress the cut, you can put a wedge in the front, a little wooden wedge or a chisel or something, and force the two halves apart so that you can easily move the blade without having to really force it. Now on the crosscut saw, we got the same blade, like that, and each tooth is bent out that way with a point on it, like a knife. So as that's the set again, so that distance there is probably about 30% or 25% wider than the actual blade itself. So that's the set on both saws, and the teeth vary because of their function. So if you cut across the grain, all you're doing is cutting the fibres straight through. Whereas ripping, you're cutting along or parallel with the fibres. That's why you need a chisel action to achieve that cut. Now, as you can see, these saws have various lengths. This is what we call a panel saw. It's just a small one that has about 15 to 18 teeth on it, and it does small jobs. So you don't have that full length of saw blade always moving. So it's very handy in a closed environment, like if you're building a kitchen and you need to cut something, you've got limited space. So you use a panel saw and it gives you a much finer cut because it has more teeth per inch. Now this here is called a tenon saw. Now mortise and tenon, we talked about mortise locks, which is the actual opening in the rail, and then the tenon goes inside it. So when you cut the tenon out to fit into the mortise, you use this. It has about 18 to 20 teeth per inch because it makes a nice fine cut. And when you cut into it, I will use the other one in a minute, it's got a spine on it, as you can see, and what it does, it keeps the blade rigid so it doesn't go all over the place and cause you to run off your marks. Now, in comparison to that, again we have a small one that does small things like dovetails, and it has 25 teeth per inch and gives you a nice clean fine cut. And this is the baby version. It gives you more distance, so you can cut further in, reducing the workload. And again, it has about the same teeth as this one, but you're doing more work per inch. So that's basically the difference between a rip saw, which is this one, and a cross-cut saw, which is this one, because of the different design in the teeth. So this is the same. As I said before, this is a multi-purpose one. So what they've done in the design, they've taken the tips off through precise machining, and they put a little chisel edge on it, like that. So you might say it's a hybrid. That's a very common word nowadays in the automotive industry. So we've got a hybrid saw, or a multi-purpose or a bi-purpose saw, dual action saw. So these saws now come in a cheap version, cheap material, and once they're blunt or dull, you've got to chuck them out, because they cannot be resharpened, as I said, because the steel on the teeth is now harder than any common file that you can buy at a hardware store. This one here is the old keyhole saw. Same thing, but it has a double action, front and back, so you can get twice the amount of work done in both directions. So very useful design, but again, throw away. And I'm very much a recycler, and I don't really appreciate throwaway things at all. If they can be restored, rebuilt, replenished, I'm into that. I might have to show you actually how you make a genuine cut to just to get a square cut on the end. So again, we draw a line, and what I do is do a plumb cut right through on both sides. And if you really get fussy and you want a perfectly square angle, as in 90 degrees and flat, I make that line all the way across. Now you can appreciate it takes a lot of time, and today time is the one thing. Time is money, and time is very scarce. That's why we have made other tools that quicken the procedure. So I'll go back to the clamp, and I'll make the cut. I'll use this one now because I don't have to be too particular, so I'll just run that through, start at an angle. Right, I can remove my thumb now, so I can't cut myself if I jump out of the curve or the cut. Right. Go right down. Now again, I lower my saw, and I'm going to go nearly all the way down my plumb cut, using the curve as a guide. Right. Now I can turn it around. This is just to show you, if you need a neat square cut, you can do it this way without having to worry about whether it's square or not. Right, now I've cut the corner on my plumb cut, which gives me the position to put my saw in to continue the cut along the surface. So I go again, do my square cut, right, so that's my offcut. as you can see, perfectly square. That's my job, as you can see, again, perfectly square. Now, another interesting thing I want to show you. If you have material left over in the actual cut, like around the middle, and there's a bit of a pointy piece sticking out, you can use your saw set, because of the different widths, you can use it just to clean up the edge, like a rasp. So I've just cleaned up the side that sticks out a bit, and the job's done. So that's how you make a square cut with a little care and a little precision. What I'm going to do now is I'll show you how to cut out a housing, because in the days when we were building houses, we didn't have the studs just nailed through the bottom to the top plate. We actually housed them in. So each stud had its station or its position along the bottom plate and identically along the top plate, and it stopped any lateral movement. So when you nailed it through the edge at a skew angle, it had nowhere to go. It was housed in, and the nail went in without the stud moving away out of position. So that's what I'll do for you now. And I'll use some real stud material, which is this. Now you might notice the blue paint on it, and that's exactly what it is. It is a solution that is sprayed on the timber, but as you can see from the end grain, it is not impregnated. And the reason for that is that when you build a house and the weather changes and the timber could get wet from the rain, this film that they spray on there temporarily keeps the timber dry. So it's more of a protection rather than an impregnation. So get the house built quickly before the next rainstorm, because this will not stop the water getting in over a long period of time. It's just there temporarily while the house is being built. As you can see, this one here, I'll leave that. This one here hasn't been painted, it hasn't been impregnated, so it's obviously for inside work where the weather will not affect it. So everything we do has a purpose and a reason. So what we'll do here, alright, I will clamp that to the bench using one of these. I'll use that one. Now this is called a G-clamp, and what it does, it holds the job in position while you're working on it. Now whenever there's movement, constant movement, like cutting timber, grinding chisels, whatever, you don't want to use the other common F clamp, which has a tendency to fall away as soon as it gets knocked. So it's not a really safe way of clamping things, because it gives way. It doesn't have the spiral as this one does to really tighten it up. So again, a choice of tools is very important to do the job safely and correctly. So we've done the squaring off. So what do we got here? We got a 42 mil piece of wood. I call it timber because it's been machined. Alright, we'll square that off with our combination square. I'll use the middle size one. Alright, and I'll put down what they call the plumb cut, which is straight up and down, square off the face. Now I can reduce that down to that size, put that there, make my plumb cut like that. Now I can either use this as a gauge, like I showed you before. So we'll make the cut at say 10 mil deep, and I'll run that along here like so. That's my horizontal, and again here, same thing. I run along there, and I've got my depth and my width already marked out. Now we go back to the clamping, and the idea of clamping it is so your job doesn't run away on you. As soon as you apply pressure on it, it'll move out of the way, and you don't want anything moving away. So in order to start a cut, you don't just go top like that. You start in the corner and use your thumb to direct your blade so it doesn't go over the line and into the area where you don't want it. So we start the cut at a very slight angle, just like that. I've only cut in about 10 mil this way and a couple of mil downwards. And then as I use that kerf or that cut as a guide, I don't need my hand anymore. And as I cut through the timber along the line, I can blow on it, clear out the sawdust so I can see the actual line. Right, so we go there. So as I get through the surface, what I always do, I will lower my saw and I will go down the actual plumb cut, and same on the other side. So we're down to 10 mil there, and then I clean out the cut itself because the way I've been cutting it causes a hump inside the cut. So I run my saw through parallel or horizontal and cut the middle section out. So I get an equal cut all the way through. Now we'll do the same with this one. See, plumb cut, level out. Now that's my housing. Alright, and I've cut it a bit small because I want to show you something. Now we read the grain. Now a timber worker will read the grain just like a musician will read his sheet music. So he will identify the direction of the grain. In this case the grain is reasonably parallel to the timber, so there is no reason to make more cuts in the waist to stop the timber cracking in the wrong direction. So if the grain were running this way or running that way, I would make at least 3 more or 4 more cuts into the waist, which breaks up the waist from and stops it from cracking away below the lines that I've drawn. So in this case, we only need 1 cut, 2 cut, and just for argument's sake or for demonstration's sake, I will just make another cut quickly in the middle. Right, again to the line, straight through. Right, so the cutting action is now finished, and now we start the chiselling. Now this is an F clamp. Obviously by its configuration it looks like an F, whichever way you're looking at it, and because it can, I'll show you what happens. If I tighten it and I give it a knock, it'll come down and loosen up and your job will fall down and you could get hurt. So as a rule, do not use these for a lot of work that has a lot of motion involved. Now, timber is very unpredictable because it is a natural material that has a grain, it has different features. So it's not a good idea to hack into the housing right along the line. So what you do, you just just run the chisel along your pencil line, just enough to mark it, and then what you do, you go about halfway and just break away the rubber, the actual material that's got to come out. Now the other side you do the same. Now I've got to clamp it because I need both hands. Pretty obvious. Now we do the same here. Just go into the soft material and then break out halfway whatever you think you won't need. Now observe what happens. I'll turn it around so you can see it. Right, as you can see, the material's coming out because of my chiseling. But I want to see now how it lines up with the other side. Because inside the cut, the grain could go that way because of the growth rings, and the middle of the cut could create a trough, which is not good for stability. So just keep working at it. It seems to be going quite well. See, that half seems to be breaking away pretty evenly. I'll turn it around that way so you can see it. Now you notice that I've got the chisel at an angle. I don't go bang straight through because it doesn't do the cutting jobs it's meant to do. A chisel is like a knife. So you need to chisel with the grain, or slowly if you have to against the grain, but you don't go straight through, risking the whole thing to break out. So we have a housing. Now the middle can be taken out by hand. Take the corner out, and using my chisel as a straight edge, I can see there's a bit of a bulge in the middle. That's level. So that cut is now level. Now, I made that housing extra narrow rather than the exact size of the stud that will go in there. To show you, if you need to widen your cut, you don't have to go across and chisel and then try to keep a saw in half in mid-air. That doesn't work. So what you do, you take an offcut. That's why I actually cut the offcut off. See, like that. Tighten that on. And then again, utilising the set, meaning the blade has the teeth going left and right, and you just run the saw along the block. And that widens the housing to the width that you want, and then you can knock it in. Here's my mallet. You can knock it in. Now that's a perfectly solid joint which will not move anywhere. So once you put nails into it, left and right, that's it. Now in today's housing industry, everything is done mainly with a nail gun, which suits 75mm nails. Just go bang, bang, bang on the surface, and as you nail into it, it moves. So you've got to get round the other side and try and get it back. Now, to forfeit all the housing, just for time's sake, you also restrict the actual strength of the house frame. Now we do the whole thing at the top again. So when you do housing frames, you lay out your top plate and your bottom plate next to each other and then draw identical housing lines through them or across them. So when you put them together, they are perfectly identical. And also, because it's all housed in, the wall doesn't go that way. And you don't necessarily have to have bracing ply on each corner before you put it up. Because a frame that's only nailed through the bottom and through the top, it's not very rigid until it's put together in conjunction with all the other frames and then tied down either with steel bracing or bracing plywood. So there's your basic principle of sawing and cutting out a housing with a combination of chisel and mallet. You notice I used my wrist only. I didn't need to go like that from the elbow because it was only a small job. And I didn't need to exert that much power on it. Now, a lot of blokes that I've watched, they do that all day long with their hand. Not a good idea, because your hand has, I forget how many bones in it. You don't want to wreck these tools that God gave you. You look after them like you look after these, because you need them for the duration of your lifespan. So don't abuse your hands by using your hands as a hammer or a mallet. It is not good for the bones. Now, in this chapter, I'm going to introduce you to a mechanical device that makes sawing a lot quicker and a lot more accurate. Now, we've talked about the hand saws, which require a certain amount of skill and accuracy because it's done freehand. Now, this device here, it is called a Mitre box, and the saw just runs along a track, as you can see, and we can easily cut thin beading similar to this. So if you're a fix-out carpenter and you've got to put doors in and architraves around the frame and stop beads inside the door to stop the door going right through, this tool here, I would suggest you have that on site all the time with you while you're doing that particular job. Now, it can be screwed to a bench. As you can see, I've clamped it down for the demonstration, but it can be what they call a static tool, so it doesn't move. So if you're in the workshop doing a certain job all the time and you need this sort of thing, then you may as well screw it down, and then you know exactly where that workstation is to be able to use it. Now, this saw will cut 90 degrees right across. It also goes 45 to the right for a mitre, or it goes 45 to the left. So as I showed you the other day, we can make a perfect mitre joint, like so, by having two options, one minus left, the other one plus right. So we can do this. Now, in cabinet making, or in carpentry, you will find the most common angles are 90, 45, and also we get 22.5, which is actually half a mitre. So if you want a joint that looks something like that, then we go 22.5, 22.5, and it makes 45 altogether. So this little device goes to 22.5 and locks in, because it is a common angle and there's no need to put it anywhere else in that scope of 90 degrees. As you can see, I've locked it into 90 degrees. I just lift the blade up, put it in position, and then without even having to look at it, all right, I can just cut through it. And I've cut off an end at 90 degrees. I'll go around to 22.5 and go half a mitre. So there's half a mitre, 22.5 degrees. So if you're doing fancy work like here on the wall, and you need a square join, or you need a 22.5 like that, this is the ideal tool to have in your workshop. Now the mitre saw obviously eliminates the use of this, the little combination square that I showed you, so you don't have to draw across it, mark it, and then take the saw and cut it. You just put it in the rack and cut it straight off, and it gives you an accurate cut every time, providing you hold it tight and it doesn't slip back and forth. So we can get mitres, beautiful joints, and we get half mitres, also very accurate, ideal for architraves on windows and doors, because there's nothing more annoying for a painter to have to fill mitre joints at the top of doors and window frames. So if we're going to do it, let's do it right, as real tradies. Right, now in order to resharpen a saw, you need the appropriate tools. For starters, I built this saw vise, I don't know, about 40 years ago, and I've used it all these years to clamp my saw in to the top two rails, which jam in the top to hold my saw in position. And then of course you need a set of files or rasps. So when you're working with wood, you have rasps that shape things in the timber to remove most of the material if your cut's a bit out of line or whatever. And then you have 3-corner files for your saws. Now depending on the actual size of the saw, whether a large one for 4 teeth per inch or a small one, that's the baby, a small one for the tenon saws or the dovetail saws that have 18 to 20 teeth per inch. So you've got to have good eyesight to do this job and a lot of patience. But it pays off. It might take you an hour to repoint or resharpen your saw, but it might cost you $20 plus petrol and time to go and buy another one. So learn how to do it. So sometimes when you have nothing to do, spend a couple of hours in the workshop like I do, resharpen all my tools. So for the next job, there's no time wasted because of blunt tools which get dangerous. Now, in the beginning, I suggested that because we do a lot of work with knots and faults in timber that we call ourselves timber surgeons rather than just chippies or tradies. Now, I reckon that when you're doing teeth, you can call yourself a dentist too, because I can work the teeth on a saw, and this thing here is called a saw set. So when I put that over the edge of the saw and I press on that handle, inside the little cavity there, a little prong comes out and pushes one tooth to the left, and then I go along alternately. I push all these teeth to the left or towards you, and then I turn the saw around and I do the same thing with the intermediate teeth and push them towards me. That establishes or re-establishes the set so that I don't have all the wear and tear on the corners causing my blade to become nearly as thick as the cut itself. So you need a saw set, and you need to be able to look at the tooth and push it out towards you, and when I turn that around I'll do the same thing and push the other tooth in the other direction. Again, very time consuming, but very good. If you don't live or work near a hardware store and you've got a blunt saw, which is a real frustrating and dangerous thing to have, grab your tools out of the bottom of your toolbox and apply the skills that you have as foundation of your trade. And you can sharpen your own tools on site. Now, people who log timber, they would have files, etc., or spare chainsaws or spare chains with them. So if the blade gets blunt or dull, they just change the chain or they change the saw over and they can get on with the job. So you've got to be prepared. And I'll just show you the procedure in sharpening or pointing a saw. Now you can see that angle of the saw matches the angle of the file. So wherever I see a reflection off the tooth, I know it's dull. A sharp saw should have no reflections off the top of the teeth because they are sharp as anything and they don't reflect any light off a flat surface. So I'll just use a couple here in the middle because most of the saw is used from there to there. So these teeth would do most of the work. So the first few inches there, or say 50 mil each way, they do a lot less work than the ones in the middle. So these are probably the ones that are a little bit dull. So now I can see the shiny bits and I can feel the tip. It now has a nice sharp edge again and will make my cutting a lot easier. Now, when I use the other one, the crosscut saw, I have to use first of all a smaller file because it has more teeth per inch, and I have to file that way. Every alternate tooth gets filed at 45, like that. Then I turn the saw around and I do the same thing the other way. Right? So that all my teeth are 45 that way and 45 that way, and that creates the tip on a normal one. Where's my texter? Right, so instead of having the little edge on it, it is still a knife tip, like that. So it's the actual tips that do the cutting across the grain. It's like a series of knives. So that's the technique and the way of resharpening your saws, because when they get blunt, they can become a bit of a nuisance. They don't do the job that they're meant to do. All right, so we've covered rasps, we've covered files for sharpening saws, we've got saw sets to do this. Now you might design something yourself on how to build a saw vise, just to give you a little bit of a challenge to design something with your own imagination, and then have that ready when your own saws, if you have the original saws you might have inherited from your dad or your grandfather, who said, righto, you can have my tools, and then it'd be worthwhile your effort and your time to restore grandpa's tools that he's used for the last 60 odd years and keep them in the family rather than toss them because your last $14 saw is blunt and useless. So if you've got good tools, good quality tools, and you've got the skills and the patience to restore them, you'll have them for decades at a go.